Jeremy Rodgers, thanks for being on this podcast.
Absolutely. I'm really happy to be here.
Let me throw the backstory in. You and I have known each other for, 15 years.
Probably at least 15, I think, maybe more. I don't know.
So I had heard about you. My wife and I had moved to Austin several years ago, and I had heard about you through this grapevine of people that were like, there's this guy in Austin who's this amazing DP, and I would just hear rumors about you for like a year, and then we finally became friends and got a chance to work together. You were working as a cinematographer on a bunch of different shows, and then we shot some movies together and shot some different projects, but this goes back. So,
Yeah, it does go back.
So.
Miss you guys. Wish out you were still in Austin.
Yeah, I can't deal with the heat. We had to get out of the heat. Well, Jeremy, tell us your story, your backstory of film and how you got into this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a longer story. I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version, but I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Went to school at VCU and studied communication arts, which is kind of a compilation of, illustration, painting, and printmaking. I wanted to be a Disney animator when I was 18 years old, and so I would always draw and sketch and paint. And I quickly learned that I didn't want to be stuck behind a computer for 12 hours a day. And I picked up a camera, and the rest is kind of history. I got into a film class, and the moment I saw Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, that was sort of the movie that catalyzed everything for me. I just couldn't stop watching it, even though it's 3 hours long. I loved it, and I couldn't get enough. And I just said, those are the kind of movies that I want to make. And it's just, it's existential, it's philosophical, it kind of asks hard questions without asking them, those types of things. And so then got into graduate school at the University of Texas, and that's what brought me to Austin. Went through grad school, and then didn't really have the desire at the time to move to LA or New York. I kind of developed a pretty good film community here in Austin. It's known to have, more of a robust film community compared to most cities in America. And so I was able to kind of carve out a little niche here, working on projects. And at the time, I wasn't really documentary based at all. I love documentaries, but I jumped into the narrative world. I jumped into, music videos and TV shows and indie movies. And I was shooting quite a bit of those, but I was also a focus puller. So I was also a camera assistant, a film loader, a second AC. And what's funny is all the other, ACs that I met were very technical, and I was probably the least technical out of all of those guys. And it just became abundantly clear to me that like, maybe this isn't my path, and it was great. I met a lot of great people. But it just wasn't, I didn't really want to just be a focus puller for the rest of my life. I felt like I had a voice and something to share with the world. Fast forward a few years, I did that for like 4 years and had the opportunity to work on The Tree of Life with Terrence Malick. And so it came full circle, that he was the guy that kind of got me into the film business, and then I had the opportunity to work with him as a second AC. And as a second AC, you are next to the camera all day. So I was just soaking it in. I was like right next to Terry, right next to, Chivo, who shot it, Emmanuel Lubezki, who's one of the best cinematographers in the world. So I just soaked in that experience for 4 months. It was awesome. But
4 months.
Yeah, it was a 4-month production. So yeah, someone told me they shot enough film to reach like Austin to Dallas, like they shot tons and tons of film.
You're shooting on 35.
Yeah, it was 35 mil. So I learned, that ages me, but I learned on film, on actual film. I was, in film school, I was learning on Super 16 and an 8 millimeter. And there's part of that I really miss. I love that technology has brought us where we are, of course, but there is, I feel like, an art form and a craft that is often sort of glossed over and missed nowadays.
The mistakes are much more high stakes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember many experiences where I had my hands in a changing tent, those tents that you set out on a table and your hands are in. It's a miniature dark room, and I'm just sweating bullets because I've can't quite get it proper, or I'm afraid that I've exposed the film, or, it was a different craft back then for sure. And you only had 10 or 11 minutes on each magazine to film. So you always had to reload at the right times, and so.
Tell me about shooting with Terrence Malick. That's a different. It's a little less rigid.
What was interesting about him is when you step on a narrative film set, you have a very structured call sheet, and time is money, and so people are very conscious of this scene is now, the setup is now, the scene is now. Terry would seem to base everything off intuition and emotion. I know that he had a plan, but he was constantly rewriting lines, rewriting the script. Sometimes even while we were filming, he would do that. And so we would film inside, and then he would see the way that, light was wrapping around a tree, and the whole crew would have to run outside and capture that light. Not many people can film that way. He's one of the few, I think, probably in the world that can do that, but he also creates some really beautiful stuff because he works that way, so.
Tell me about, I remember you mentioned this butterfly story one time. Tell me about that.
Oh yeah. So we were filming with Jessica Chastain and Brad Pitt in the scene outside of the main house that we were shooting at. And it was in the morning, so the light was awesome. It was beautiful light. And they're both preparing for their scene, and Terry sees a butterfly flying around and he's like, "Oh, grab the cameras." And so the camera department runs for the cameras, and we start chasing this butterfly that's just flying around these city blocks, And meanwhile, Brad Pitt and Jessica Chastain are just like, "We're ready," But what's cool about shooting that way is that the butterfly comes full circle. Jessica Chastain steps out in the middle of the road and holds her hand out, and the butterfly lands right in her hand, and we're shooting, So that's what I mean by you can't obviously plan something like that. It's just, you're chasing those moments and hoping something beautiful and poetic will come out of it. So
when you first started, you're working in that world.
Mm-hmm,
like
absolutely.
What lessons did you learn about storytelling and about being a filmmaker in those environments?
Well, I think, on top of just learning about story arcs and story structure, I was learning set etiquette, which is a big thing, I think, for newcomers in the business. I think having a proper set etiquette, knowing when to talk, when not to talk, those types of things really, really matter to people. And I think having a sense of humility really matters, and kind of, I was just learning to sort of walk into each situation with my hands open and as a humble learner. And I think that's really important, especially in a world where there are very inflated egos. When you're willing to say, like, what I'm creating is worthy to put on a big screen and be shown around the world, humility and modesty go really far, and just hard work. And so I was learning those life lessons, in those moments. I think one of my strengths is that I'm an adaptable person. And so I try to go into each situation and read the climate of the room. And so that's why I've been able to kind of go around the world to lots of different situations, some chaotic, some very quiet, and just sort of melt away in those circumstances. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. But I was, obviously I was learning so much about the kind of set that I gravitated towards, the kind of projects that I gravitated towards, the kind of stories that I gravitated towards, And so that was a huge learning experience for me for those 4 years. But I felt like there was still something missing. I felt like I said earlier, I have a voice, and I wanted to listen to that. There was a yearning to do something else. And it's not like I had a bad experience on Tree of Life. It was the complete opposite. I had a great experience, but I wanted to create. I wanted to create something that would sort of impact the world in a greater way, maybe. And so I left the film business. I stopped being in the camera union and left that part of the film business and went documentary. And
but you also, before you did that, you
Mm-hmm.
also shot on a television series, didn't you?
Yeah, I was an assistant cameraman on Friday Night Lights for a couple of seasons. So that was a lot of fun too. That was shot in Austin. I think it had 5 seasons, and I was on 2 of those seasons. And that was a blast to work on as well. But that was a, completely different ball game than Tree of Life. It was, 3 different camera units running around, very much shot like a documentary itself. very little lighting, kind of quick lighting setups to make it look a little bit more raw and edgy. And so the camera department was always sprinting on that. So, but that was a lot of fun.
What did you learn on that show?
Again, for me, because I was a camera assistant, I learned the type of climate that I really like. I'm learning about set etiquette in those circumstances. Meeting people, I think meeting people is always something that you walk away with and hope that you can kind of create a network of people that are in your orbit that you can work with again. So it's those types of life lessons for me at that point. It wasn't necessarily Friday Night Lights, as much as I love that show. It wasn't something like, I want to create something like this, It was more of those kind of lessons of just hard work, humility again, those types of things.
So I thought it was interesting, and you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but I remember early on when we first started getting to know each other, you told a story about being in a hotel room one night. And
you're going to have to jog my memory.
You said, I just realized like this was my life.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if you'd be willing to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, even rewinding it further, when I first left Virginia, I grew up in a very small town in Virginia with a very close family. And I have this image burned in my mind of my mom in the middle of the road and just like leaving, down this hill and driving to Texas. And my mom told me, she said, from a very young age, I had this sense inside of me that you were going to be on the road. You were going to be traveling. And I have always had this sort of conflicting view of travel and kind of love-hate relationship with it. I think if anyone is honest with, when you're on the road a lot, it can be a grind and it's hard. Especially when you throw a family into that. So back then even, I think I was sensing like, this isn't quite normal. I can't just, I can't make plans for Saturday night with somebody because if somebody calls on Friday, I have to take that job, And so there was an element of wanting and longing to travel and see the world, but also this element of this deep longing for home at the same time, a sense of home. And I don't necessarily mean brick and mortar, though there is that component to it, but just a community, sort of some kind of rhythm or normalcy. And I knew like whenever I was in those hotel rooms, like I was not going to have that, I wasn't going to have that access to it. And so it's kind of hard and still is.
But you actually, there was like a point, I remember you told me this story about being kind of in a hotel room, You've reached this pinnacle of everything that you always wanted to do and saying this isn't.
Yeah, I mean, for me, working with Terry was a dream come true. And I reached that, apex and there was something about it that was still missing, and I just had this moment where I was like, I've got to turn, I've got to do something, I've got to go in a new direction. And I started working for, a church for 6 years after that. And what was good about that experience for me was that I was able to find my style and find my kind of aesthetic and find my voice and all of that. There were a lot of other good, things that came out of that time, but I also fell in love with the art of documentary in that time. And it completely changed my life. So
I want to talk about that for a second. So you're working for a church, but what a lot of people don't realize now is that a lot of these churches that are more, that are larger, they have production departments. I remember I called you or I saw a picture of you back before we knew each other and I was like, those are like real cameras. Like these guys aren't shooting Sunday morning. So, I mean, you were producing docs and you were telling stories and you were in it.
Yeah.
I mean, tell me about that.
What was cool about it is that I think if you step into, I think it applies to the commercial world as well, not just the church world, but you kind of have to steer the ship into what I would call true documentary storytelling. So a lot of organizations and churches will hire very talented filmmakers and say, we want you to come on board and do some storytelling, do some, throw out cool terms. But what you're really doing is informational videos. You're actually just kind of doing interviews about that are more geared towards internal use, right? And so for 2 years, I kind of said, hey, I think that there's something more that we need to be doing, and that's actually getting into people's lives. Like what would happen if we took a camera, and this was my passion, like what, and I've seen the result of it. But when you get into someone's life, you build trust, you build a relationship, and your camera begins to kind of fade away, and you're observing and you're a witness to what's happening in their lives. It's a powerful tool. And so I was trying to sort of persuade and encourage the leadership to go in that direction. And thankfully, to their credit, they let me. It was sort of a trial run for 6 months or so, but they loved what came out of it, and that's what I began to focus on for the next 4 years. There were just what I would call true documentary storytelling, where you're actually getting into somebody's life. You're not just sort of there to kind of set up an interview and then walk away. You're getting into their lives and having empathy, stepping into their shoes and really hearing their story. And when you do that, the result is typically pretty powerful. And then the people watching it say like, oh, I can do that too. It has this replication effect. And so that was what I was really passionate about. So
one of the things for me, it's always been a challenge, is if I get in the wrong environment for too long, it's almost like this nuance. I forget the storytelling because I just get into the repetitiveness of creating or just making the sausage, right?
Right.
And I always thought that was very interesting to be able to move into that environment where it's like, well, they're paying me to do this, and let's just and then all of a sudden you lose that lack of storytelling, and it's like the thing that makes you great, you let go of because of the environment you're in or the circumstances of paychecks or insurance or whatever it is. And I see a lot of filmmakers that get into that a little bit, and then that you can tell there's this angst and want of wanting to tell stories, but they can't get the leadership to buy in because it does take a bit of time. It doesn't take one film. It takes maybe 4 or 5 in an environment for it to start getting in the water stream.
Yeah.
And I love that you were what Chris and I went to that church. So I saw the work and I started to see that those doors, the stories that were coming out were stuff that I wanted to watch, not because they were these heart-wrenching things, even though some of the stuff was very intimate, but it was inspiring and educational of their world. But then it was like a tapestry of the community that you were a part of.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that really was, I think, the power of doing so many stories there, is that all of a sudden it wasn't just somebody coming in and sitting down and consuming. It was like you were a part of this family of people living and trying to live a certain way around a set of values and beliefs.
And it became part of the culture, I feel like.
Oh my gosh.
It was sort of, people kind of knew whenever I would reach out to them what they were signing up for, in a sense,
Yeah.
And they embraced it because I think they saw the films, the power that, hopefully that they were actually having some sort of impact within the walls of the church and outside of the church as well. So, yeah, so it was a good time and formative years for me, for sure. And I think, people do get caught up in very real life things. People it's good for people to have insurance. It's good for people to pay bills,
Oh, man.
And so I do realize that I was in a unique position to kind of create those types of films inside of a giant organization. It's not usually the case, but even today, I'm still like with commercial clients and, corporate clients. Like I was hired by KPMG to do, which is a giant corporation accounting firm, right? They brought me on to do true humanizing stories about their employees, which, you think of KPMG and you think of kind of like just corporate office, and I was like, let's pull them out of their office. Let's see who these people are. And, I was able to travel around the country to 9 different locations and actually spend time with people in their homes. And it was awesome. And they loved it. It's like when you get people out of their normal situation and what you would expect, and it can be a really powerful thing. So
I think most corporate clients, they call a production company and they have their vision of what it's going to be. And it's safe. It's like, hey, we want you to know our employees the way that we want to portray them. And then they bring in somebody like you and they know from the body of work. And I think that's why it's so important to have a body of work that represents who you are. And when they bring in Jeremy, it's like, oh, this guy's really going to get into the lives of people. So it's like the brand of who you are is really, I mean, you're a true documentary filmmaker. I know you do narrative stuff too and all that, but when somebody hires you to shoot and direct a documentary, it's like, it's game on. And
it's a, and it's a give and take. It's not, I don't claim to have all the right answers.
No.
I have blind spots as well. And so when, the commercial world is a totally different world, then that's the interesting thing about all of this, is that we can work in human rights and social impact, and then we also have to sort of straddle the lanes and ride the lanes of like corporate America as well,
selling Skittles.
And so the hope is that even with, whichever lane you're in, that you get to actually kind of have impact and create something beautiful and true, right? And it's, so yeah, when people bring me on a project, there is that sort of, humanizing component that they're looking for. They probably wouldn't hire me just to sort of film an interview in a desk at a giant office building, right? So although I would be willing to do that, I just got back from a big, dental expo in Chicago. It's like, that's the crazy thing about this business, is that you're working on all sorts of different things. And, my prayer before every project is that I would serve others above myself, and that I would not just do good work, but do excellent work. And so that means, like, yes, the movie that I worked on in Israel and Palestine, yes, the stories that I was doing for the church, but also, yes, a dental expo in Chicago, it's like, you want that to be excellent as well. And so people work really hard on those things, and I want to honor that and respect that. So
you're working you're doing the stuff at church, and then we had shot a movie. I don't know how you finagled being able to pull off.
I don't know how I convinced them to go away and do that.
So I called Jeremy and I said, hey, I want you to DP this last like 20 days in Rwanda. And somehow the church let you, I don't remember how you did it, but
yeah,
you were like, yeah, I'm in. And
it worked out. It was amazing.
And what was interesting about that shoot, and we were just talking about it with Sean on this other podcast episode, is that we brought a huge crew over there, and then but the heart of the movie really happened in that 16 days with you and I and Sean. Is that I know it drove Greg Quidar crazy, because I would just say, hey, I need these two guys, and let everybody else pick off that shot list that we need. But the reason for that was that skill that you had of being able to be in the room with anybody and make them feel calm and open, and it felt intimate. And so the three of us shot all these intimate scenes with people that kind of played out. And then we got home from that, and then you ended up coming up with your own film.
Yeah. Well, just to rewind a little bit, I mean, I think to your point, it's interesting, I think, for your audience to know.
I have an audience.
You have an audience. It's amazing.
Audience of one. Me, my wife.
But
oh yeah, there. And I will probably leave that.
It is interesting when you, to your point, I'm a big fan of having kind of scaled down minimal crews, but I think there's room for both. It depends on what you're doing, of course.
Yeah.
But I do think what you can accomplish with 2 or 3 people kind of in a room with somebody on a very candid and personal level is remarkable. You know, if you have a DP, a director, producer, and a sound mixer, like that's really, it's right there. And I think it's disarming to people that you're filming, and then all of those people, I think, Sean included, would have some level of storytelling chops, right? They're listening too, and so you're bouncing off. It can be this really cool dance that happens. You're bouncing off ideas with each other. You're trying to sort of be intuitive about, what to follow and which way to go. And I think also, and I remember Rising from Ashes was like this as well, but knowing when to put the camera down is paramount. So it's obviously important to know when to pick it up and start shooting, and you want to do that, but also knowing when to put it down is really critical as well. And just lock eyes with people. That's very, very important as a filmmaker, that I try to adopt, in everything that I'm doing today as well. So,
Well, I remember there was two moments that were like lessons learned for me when I hire a DP. There's the DP that sits there and waits, drinks coffee, and waits for you to tell them what to shoot. And on that shoot, I remember it rained a lot on a couple of days. And I remember there was one day where we were waiting for the rain, or we're just waiting for this moment to happen. And I was like, where's Jeremy? And I looked out the window and you were just shooting B-roll of stuff so you were always working. You knew the story. You knew that there was probably things that would serve me. And I think there's a difference between a DP who just waits for somebody to tell you, for you to tell them what to do. And then somebody who says, I know the vision and I'm just going to capture this. If they don't use it, they don't use it, but I'm going to work for it. And that was always what separated you from a lot of people that I've worked with, is that I remember there was another thing we were shooting one time, and Kristen and I were in this, we were staying at somebody's house in Napa, and I saw somebody go by the window. I was like, what the hell was that? And then I look out the window and you were out shooting in the morning. Like, I was like,
it's the best light.
I was like, you can't, a good light and a DP.
But stories don't stop because of rain. That's just contributes to the story. And what you find is this, what might be sort of a chaotic or active, or high energy pulse of a place, all of a sudden slows down. The animals slow down, the people slow down. And that's part of the environment that you want to capture, right? So maybe somebody comes inside and just sits and looks out a window because it's raining.
Yeah.
That captures part of their personality. So that then it becomes part of their character, which is part of character development, which is part of a story, right? So you just kind of want to always be ready in those things.
But and alongside of that, I remember in that same 3-hour window, the first was you went out and shot. Second thing that happened, we needed this interview with Adrian, who was going to tell us about his backstory during the genocide. And I've been waiting for like 7 years on this thing. And I just never felt like it was the right moment. Or it was probably 6 years. And in the middle of that storm, it was you and I and Adrian sitting in that living room. And I looked at Adrian and I nodded my head and he nodded his head. And the three of us went into this other room. And it was literally a DSLR, Sean, and you were on a shoulder rig. And you opened some shades to give light on his face. And he told that story. And I'll never forget the whites of his eyes as he was telling that story started to just become darker and darker because it was so intense for him. And it didn't dawn on me till later that it wasn't Adrian's story only at that moment. It was that all of us had shared that experience. I remember we walked out and looked at each other and there was just no words for it.
Yeah.
What a privilege it was to be invited into somebody's world that would allow us at that depth. You can't do that with every DP. That was something that was just those little moments that separate, I think, the difference between a shooter and a storyteller.
Well, and thank you for that. But I think also that's a credit to the years and years of, relationship and trust building, that it goes back to that, especially when you're doing a feature documentary like that. And look, I know there's not, for every filmmaker out there, there's not an opportunity to build trust over the course of years and years and years, right? But for this one, it was fitting and it worked and it was right.
Yeah.
And I think because Adrian trusted you, he was willing to kind of step aside with us and talk.
Yeah.
And so if we were just some random crew that just showed up,
Yeah.
And what I call parachute style filmmaking, where you're parachuting in, and then you're ziplining back out a few days later.
Yeah.
That wasn't what you did at all. You went in and you tilled the soil, over years, and you built those relationships, and all of that matters.
Yeah.
And also just, hoping to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
In those moments is really critical too.
But going back to your point on like set etiquette, like those moments, it's like, hey, the sound's not working. There's like an environment you have to create where people feel open and willing to share those stories. And it's like it's so vulnerable as a director. And as you know this, it's like you are completely dependent on your DP and your sound person to capture it, because you literally can't focus on anything else but what's in front of you.
Yeah.
And that, you feel like it's like getting in a car with a blindfold on and getting to that point where you have people around you that are that good and all the pieces add up. It's like
Yeah.
that's where I feel like good stories come from.
And I think set etiquette is crucial in that. I mean, if we had a PA who was just sort of talking through that, I actually don't hire people like that because I don't want to be around them. You know, it
No.
sounds so crazy, but I'm a pretty introverted person. But I know that even on, I'm working on Full Swing right now. And that's a completely different environment. I'm around celebrity golfers and agents and their families, and you're going from like human rights documentaries to celebrity golfers.
Yeah, what's that?
And
What's
it's
that
like,
environment like?
but I use the same approach.
Yeah,
It's
tell
just
me
who I
about
am
that.
as a person. It's like, it's very much, I'm on a shoulder rig. I'm running around with a camera, and you're trying to follow a story. And it's the same. You have to sort of really, really listen and be in tune with that person and their emotions and know when to sort of step back and give them space and when to push a little bit. And it's a tough balance sometimes because you don't want to push hard, at the wrong moment, but you also don't want to shy away from something that's emotional. And so you're put in situations that are pretty stressful at times to try and figure out and negotiate and navigate. But, I think for the most part, I've been able to do a pretty good job at some of that.
So on a show that's on Netflix, right? That's where I've seen it.
Yeah.
So on a show like that, how much are you the DP, and how much do you find yourself having to direct or set a scene? Or
So
create a scene?
I'm credited as a director of photography on that show.
Okay.
But the way that it's shot is interesting in that, in England, they have something called a shooter producer, it's very common over there. And one of the production companies attached to this project is Box to Box Productions, and they're from England. So they did the Drive to Survive series. They've done some other sports series as well, but it's not uncommon in that situation to be left alone. And there are field producers who are awesome, and it's nice when they're around because they can kind of do some of the heavy lifting in terms of story as well. But I'm in situations alone a lot where I'm having to sort of just follow the story and follow the action and that type of thing. So it's both. You're kind of straddling those two worlds as a DP.
So when you're with a celebrity golfer who signed up for the show, you're shooting, and you see a moment as somebody who's, we'll get into your feature here in a second, but you know what's going on and where there's a storyline and a thread. How do you evaluate when it's because I think a lot of documentary filmmakers, whether it's split unit or something happens, and then they're trying to figure out, is it my place to step in or just document it and how do you nuance that?
So we do collaborate with the producers and the executive team to kind of figure out together sort of, okay, do I need to keep following this or do I need to step away? For the most part, obviously there are situations where I'm alone and trying to figure that out. But for the most part, I have ears in, and a lot of times the producers are trying to figure out what storylines to follow. And that can be tough and tricky when you have dozens and dozens and dozens of different storylines to follow. And it's the beginning of the season, so you don't know how it's going to culminate and end. And so you just kind of have to shoot a lot and hope and pray that something forms over time. But
do you have to engage with the talent?
Absolutely, yeah. 100%.
And so tell me about that. That's what I'm asking about. Is your talent engagement versus...
Yeah, it depends on the person again. There are players that are a lot more outgoing and willing to sort of approach you and say hi and ask about your family, of course. And there are others that are much more internal, especially with a sport like golf. It's a mental sport, and so you don't want to be in a situation where you're running around right in front, right when they're about to drive. It's like you have to be very polished and nuanced in what you do. Also, the days leading up to the tournament are the times when you're really engaging them during their practice rounds, talking to them, trying to set up like home visits or drive-ins or, can we go home with you tonight to your hotel or Airbnb? You're trying to do a lot of that, that meet, the in-between moments before the actual tournaments start. And that's usually what happens. And then once the tournament starts, it's like, it's a little trickier to actually kind of get in there and be buddies with them because they're focused, and they should be.
How big is the crew on that show?
There are usually, for a tournament, there are 3 different units typically. Usually two out of the 3 units have a producer, like a field producer, and then a DP, a sound mixer. And then what they would do a lot of times is leave me by myself just with the sound mixer, you know, and then they would pop in every now and then to check on me. And I'm thankful for that. They just, over the course of 2 years now, they sort of have given me more and more responsibility, and I'm grateful for that. You know, it's not something I take lightly.
Yeah.
But it's hilarious, man. We have like,
Yeah, tell me, you got to give me some humor, because
we're like,
that
I mean, it's
budget's
just
got to
like,
be.
it's a crazy world. I mean,
Because you don't golf.
no, I don't. I follow sports, you know, I like sports, and I knew some
You
of the
can swing that
storylines.
if you.
Yeah, my posture is changing a lot, but
Yeah, you and Dave. You can, because I'll just.
but now I really enjoy the sport just from I mean, it's incredible to watch. There's 150 people in the world that can hit a golf ball exactly where they want it to go, you know, and it's pretty incredible to watch. But yeah, I follow it now because of the storylines. You know, I know the people, I know most of the golfers now, and it's like it's a lot of fun for me to follow and cheer people on and stuff. So
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to roll in here in white pants.
I thought about it, like a Titleist hat or something.
So you're shooting that show now, but before that, you moved from just not being a DP. You're like, hey, I want to make my own film.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So it goes back to impact and wanting to sort of help the world in some way. I'm a firm believer that everyone should just go everywhere, you know, and sometimes we overthink that. But yeah, just go places, you know, even if it's your own backyard, do it, you know. And I developed a passion for the Middle East in particular, for Israel and Palestine. And I have a big passion for conflict transformation and peace building, peacemaking, those kind of ideas. And so obviously the situation over there is ripe for that. And in the United States, I grew up hearing kind of one side of the story. You know, I grew up in a small, very, very conservative town in America. And so I heard one side of the story. And it wasn't until, my late 20s and early 30s that I started to realize, wow, there's this other whole component. There's this other people group that lives there. And I had the opportunity to travel over to Bethlehem in the Palestinian territories and meet with people there. And it was incredibly transformative and incredibly powerful. And I met with a man named Daoud over there, who's a farmer. And he's been described as a Martin Luther King Jr. figure of the Middle East. Instead of responding with violence, he's responding with hope and love. And his story has been, so widely regarded that over 10,000 people a year now are visiting his farm to hear his story. And not only is he responding in this way, but his 100-acre farm is under constant threat of annexation by the Israeli military. And so while you might say like, oh, this person has a right to defend their farm, that's not what he's thinking at all. He calls it creative nonviolent resistance. And he really adheres to the principles of Jesus and nonviolence. And so when you put it, we've heard of these things during the civil rights movements here in America, those types of things. But when you put it into the context of this is the Middle East, this is Israel, Palestine, look what's happening now. Mm-hmm. It really is light and darkness. It really, really is. And a light grows brighter, when it's alone in darkness. Like if you put a candle in a room that's completely dark, you're going to see that candle from 100 meters away. But if there's lots of other lights around, you're not going to really necessarily be able to single out one light. Well, he is one of a few stories of hope over there.
But let me go backwards. So what people are probably thinking of is this is in context to what's going on in the last.
It's Exactly.
This was 3 or 4 years ago.
This was many years ago. So this was like, I mean, you worked on Rising from Ashes for how long?
Ever.
Yeah, that's how I feel about this. Is like the film is officially done, by the way.
Okay.
But yeah, this was back in. I mean, really, I think we started shooting in 2012.
Okay, so 2012, you hear of the story of an olive farmer who has a farm on the border of Palestine and Israel.
That's right. Yeah.
And you start researching it. Mm-hmm. If you were to look at kind of our film school system of you have an idea and then you got to go into development, pre-production, production, post-production, marketing, distribution, impact, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay, So you have this idea and you're going to make a film about it. So let's start there. You start with an idea and then walk me through the process.
Yeah, it is. I was already, like I mentioned earlier, really interested in other cultures. And this began to kind of rise to the surface of like winning my affections, and doors started to open in that area. And I went to visit him multiple times before I started filming. And I would have never gone over there and just film blindly. I think it was really important to be welcomed by that family and that community into their world,
How did you afford to go multiple times on discovery trips and development trips?
I mean, it wasn't like I didn't go over there like 10 times. I probably went over there 3 times total.
Well, yeah, but that's still $2,000-3,000 a trip.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. I mean, I was also single at the time when I was, so I could go and make it a lot cheaper then. But I did create out of that. It was in terms of fundraising, I would call it, face-to-face crowdsourcing, where I was traveling around the country and speaking with people about the vision of the project and showing them footage and talking about my heart behind it. And, meeting with people face to face was really critical for me to kind of just, I didn't want to just take people's money, and not actually have a relational aspect to it, So it took a lot of time, a lot of resources to do that. But yeah, that's slowly how we started to develop seed money to go over there more and more. So
you went over, built rapport probably without a camera.
Yeah, I think I went over there twice without a camera. I went once for 6 weeks, and and that was it. And then we moved. So yeah.
And so developed that, went over, built relational capital.
Yeah.
Then shot a little bit, created kind of a teaser trailer kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
The pitch deck and those things, and then decided that the best way to pull this off was to be living there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think his, stories like that want to be told in a more textured way, right? You really kind of have to be a witness to what they're doing. And I would never be able to fully empathize with, what an Israeli or Palestinian is going through because I'm a white American person, But if I can get close to that, if I can sort of feel that to some degree, then I would hope that my camera can show that as well. And I think it goes back to these weird sort of catch-22s where you sometimes have to leave your home in order to hopefully give other people a chance at a home, of having a home. You have to sort of like, maybe you have to fast some meals so that other people can occasionally eat. There's this weird sort of dichotomy with humanity where it's this give and take, and so I really very much saw it like that. And Lydia went with me too, and Jesse,
yeah,
my son.
So you had gotten married,
yes,
and in the midst of all this, kind of you found the story,
yeah.
And we always say if you can say no to a story, definitely do, But this is not just this isn't just a cool project. It's like something you really believed in, that you were willing to move your family to another country.
Yeah.
And I think that's the type of commitment it takes. I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with that, but
yeah. I mean, it was interesting because it was not easy. It's not like, you can talk about it in 5 minutes and it seems like it happened like that. But we went back and forth for months and months on whether we should even go, and finally we said it's important and we should go. And one guy a friend of mine asked me, like, would you still go if you were not making this film? And it was really, really interesting to hear that perspective, because it was like, am I sort of idolizing this future film? That was the heart of it. And my answer to him was yes. And I truly believe that, even if it were not for the film, my heart was with the people and my heart was with the situation. And I wanted to, not that I could solve a 75-year-old conflict, but if I could be one mosaic stone and sort of, or one piece of thread in a much greater tapestry, then it was worth it,
So you raised the money to move to Israel to film a feature documentary about this guy.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, I mean, I don't want to gloss over the work that it takes to do that.
It was a lot of heavy lifting, absolutely. And I remember vividly, Jesse was 5 months old when we left, and I remember the flight over there, like thinking, "Oh my God, what have I gotten us into?" Just scared out of my mind. But I think there's ignorance is bliss in some ways, right? Looking back as a parent now, a father of two, like I even think, like, would I do that all over again? I probably would do things differently,
Would you?
Maybe a little bit. I don't know. I probably would. Yeah.
So you moved to Israel. You're there for how long?
Close to 3 years. We had planned to be there for longer, and that's something we can get into as well. But yeah, so we were there for close to 3 years, and I would go to the farm 2 to 3 days a week. So I didn't want to be in his face all the time, right? There wasn't a need to have 20,000 hours of footage. But if I could kind of interact with him 2 to 3 days a week, then it was enough. And so I did that the first year. Then the second year, it was kind of like 1 day a week here, 1 day a week there. And I was creating detailed notes and sort of structures as I was moving along. And yeah, I mean, it was not easy to get to his farm even. It took like an hour to get to his farm, even though it was only, 10 miles away, because you're going through military checkpoints and all these types of things. And so there was always a risk of the camera being found and confiscated and footage being confiscated. And
Wait. You weren't, the filming part wasn't, that's not like that. It's not like here where you could just roll through with a camera and.
No.
Tell me about that. I had no idea about this.
Well, I don't want to get too much into the politics of everything, but
let's call it logistics.
It is a highly political situation, right? So you can't ignore that.
Even then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's for 70 plus years now, there's been, an occupation of the Palestinian people a military occupation going on and so there's military everywhere. And so I would have to go through various checkpoints and show my passport at various times and get questioned and all that, searched and all of that stuff. So it's not just sort of an easy go in, film, come home for the day, export the footage, do it, cut, copy, paste. It's not like that at all.
Wow. And I didn't know any of that.
The first year I didn't actually have a car, so I had to take a public bus. And it would stop me, so it would go through the checkpoint, and then I would have this little place where I stopped. And it was interesting because I was the only white dude at this bus stop. It was all like Arab Palestinians that were at this bus stop. And all those guys were like taxi drivers around there. And I was just sitting there alone every day for months and months and months and months. And, with my gear and all of that. And finally, this one guy, this Muslim man, big red beard, an imam. So he was like a Muslim priest, basically. He kind of waves me over after months of doing this. And, all the stereotypes are going through your mind. Like, what is going on? I can't speak the language. I am studying Arabic, by the way, too, a little bit through this. And so I'm learning a little bit of Arabic, a little bit of the dialect as well, just so I can get around. And they asked me if they want tea. They have built a little fire. They asked me if I wanted tea. And then I would sit and have tea and snacks.
Wait, you're
at a taxi bus stop, like somewhere in the middle of the West Bank. Yeah. And they build little fires to heat up tea and stuff. And then one day he invites me into his car. And of course, like all this stuff is going on through your mind, right? Like, should I get into this car? I don't want to be rude. He doesn't speak any English. I don't speak any Arabic. But he pulls out his smartphone and he's playing this little like puzzle game. And he wants me to help him with the puzzle game. That's the whole reason he invited me into his car. So every week I would show up, I would go into his car and play this little game. We couldn't speak anything to each other, but it's just one of those moments where you realize like, these are humans, and like this is the beauty of humanity, right? Like, let's just get rid of all of the stereotypes, that exist, and let's get rid of all that stuff and break down those barriers and meet people and meet them where they are. So,
and that's not even the story you're shooting.
No. The story behind the story of this is maybe even more powerful than the story itself.
That's what I'm learning here. I'm like,
yeah.
why don't we take that footage and recut this thing? Because
I mean, there were moments I remember, like, you know, that area is, so where we were is not Gaza, which is where the war is happening right now, but there is a constant threat of violence that happens. So like when people visit Israel, they're like, this is awesome, right?
yeah,
But they're being sort of bussed from holy site to holy site to holy site. But when you live there, you're hearing the gunshots, you're hearing the, you know, the sirens going off for missiles
you would hear that stuff.
almost on a daily basis. Yeah. And I remember there were times when, you know, had a machine gun thrown in my face, you know, that kind of thing, from the military. There was a day when there was a terrorist attack outside of the bus stop, and Lydia could hear it from our apartment, and I was on the bus, and she called me crying, just like, can you please just come home today, you know? And it was all that kind of stuff, you know?
And you have a 1-year-old at home at this point.
Yeah. And that would be the weird thing, right? Is that we were learning to be new parents in a completely different culture. And, you know, Lydia's experience of that time is vastly different than my experience, because I was going through these checkpoints, I was filming, I was meeting people, and she was raising our child while I was at work. And so and she's a woman, you know, so it was in a patriarchal culture. And so, but after that first year, we just found our way. The first year was incredibly difficult, but after that first year, we found our way, and we ended up loving it. We just loved it, yeah. And we really didn't want to leave. We had even talked about staying longer, you know.
Finish the film and just stay.
Well, like, so we had dedicated about 3 years to try and finish everything we needed to shoot. But yeah, we were having conversations about what it would look like to stay longer, you know. That's how much it kind of grew on us. But we, you know.
Then there's a twist to the story.
There is a twist, yeah. And I'm, you know, glossing over a lot of different things here that, but I got a phone call from Lydia. You know, we had Jesse, who was our first son, and he was almost 3 at the time. And, you know, that was his only home, essentially. And then Lydia got pregnant, which we were very, very happy about. And we had planned to have the baby there in Jerusalem, but we found out, I think it was at 16 weeks gestation, that Ethan, who was in Lydia's body at the time, has spina bifida. And so it was one of those moments where, you know, your entire universe just turns on its head and your whole world is shaken. And of course, I didn't know what spina bifida meant, so we read about it and we were just in tears. Like, possible, you know, brain damage, affects your bladder, incontinence, might not be able to walk, big things. It's not just a small thing, it's a big thing. And you know, within weeks, Lydia and I had to make a decision, you know, about moving or staying. There were procedures happening around the world at the time where they could do in utero processes and procedures to help kind of offset the damaging effects of spina bifida. And one of the meccas of the medical world happens to be in Houston, which is about 3 hours away from Austin. And so everyone said, why don't you go there, you know? And so within weeks, everything that we knew from the past 3 years, we were packing our bags up and moving to Houston. And within weeks of landing, Lydia had this procedure where, you know, they were doing back surgery on Ethan while he was in utero, and then put him back in to keep growing. And it was an incredibly difficult time in our lives for many reasons. Lydia was basically on bed rest, you know, because she couldn't do anything really, and because if her uterus ruptured, it could kill her and Ethan. And then Jesse's 3 at the time, and he's crying every single night, take me back home, take me back to Jerusalem. I don't know where I am. I don't know, you know, what this place is. I want to go home every day, you know. All his friends and his whole world were ever there. That's all he knew. And then, you know, this film that I had already at that point worked like 5 years on, probably between pre-production and production, was just completely put on ice. You know, it's one of those moments where you are presented with an acute situation and you have to sort of take care of the most immediate need, and that's my family. And so there was a sense of like, urgency to just put things on hold. And so I did that. I had to do that for a long time just to make sure that we survived. And we were bleeding out, we were struggling. I can remember it was July 4th and we were in an apartment in Houston, and our son Ethan was in the NICU. He was born prematurely at 3 pounds something, so he spent some time in the NICU. And I remember it was July 4th and just looking out over the skyline of Houston, and there were fireworks, and for some reason I just started crying. It was like, where am I? I went from being in the old city of Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and when you're in this place where it just feels like so much gravity and so much weight with every conversation you have with somebody, and then you're in Houston, full of strip malls and hot weather and all those things, and opulence, and plenty. And so it was just this weird convergence of worlds, all of a sudden. So
Wow, dude.
yeah, it was tough, but we've persevered through it, and we've been persistent. It hasn't been us in a silo. It's taken a village, a community of people around us to help lift us back up. And after 5 years, Ethan is 5 now. He's doing really well. He is the life of the party. So he's our social one. Lydia, myself, and Jesse, our oldest, are all introverts. Ethan is the extroverted one. He takes his little wheelchair and he wants to be the center of attention in a party. So he's a treasure, and he brings so much joy to us. But yeah, it's been an absolute journey. It's been 5 years, and it feels like we're still just kind of sort of coming up for air and trying to figure out our way forward,
So you're in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Things get healthy in the last 5
Yeah.
years, and then, the begging question is, whatever happened to the film, and then what are you doing now?
Yeah. So the film, I slowly started to sort of chip away at some of the editing. So imagine this: the entire film is in Arabic, right? I speak just enough to kind of understand, so I have to get all of those clips transcribed, all of that.
Oh my
So
God.
I found an amazing translator in Jerusalem, this Muslim lady who is awesome. And so what I started to do was I created basically a 50-page document of, this was like part of my therapy, I feel like. I just like got in the zone. I had this little office with nothing but fluorescent lights. I called it the dentist office, and I would just get in there and start working. And I created this 50-page document of notes. I started cutting scenes together and sending them to Jerusalem through Dropbox, and our translator would send me back material. And all of that had to be time code stamped and everything. It was a very intricate process. One of the coolest feedbacks I ever got from anybody over there was our translator. She saw most of the footage, and she was like, "Jeremy, I feel like you care more for our people than our own people do." And it was just like, thank you. I do care for your people a lot. And it just meant a lot to me, because you question yourself as a white filmmaker going into these types of places. But, when she says something like that, it's pretty powerful,
Yeah. Keeps you motivated.
It does. So I think my first cut of the film was 6 hours, and then chiseled it down to 3 hours. It got to 2.5 hours. And then I was like, I can't do anymore. I need help. And so I was able to raise money for an editor, and they finally got it down to like 97 minutes. And then I sort of polished things off. But yeah, the film is done. It actually got into a really great film festival, not this year, but last year. And I decided not to show it at the festival.
Really?
And it got into Doc NYC, and it's everything we dreamed of, right? Like the impact, all of that kind of stuff.
That's right. I do know, but I forgot that you didn't show it there. That's a
Yeah.
really hard festival to get into.
It was a dream come true. I think I remember crying with Lydia when we got the acceptance letter, and just being like, yes, it was all worth it. All of this was worth it. And because we knew it wasn't about us, it was about, sharing hope, and Dawood, was having second thoughts. I think his situation understandably is very, very, very volatile. And so he just pleaded with us that we wouldn't show it at that point, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's like, you know, the target maybe on your back becomes a little bit bigger when you have a film that's out there like that, and which is something that we all talked about and kind of came to terms with before we filmed. And international support in his situation has always been helpful. So it's like, okay, if we can get the word out, it's going to be helpful. And I had a choice there. You know, we had every right to show the film. I had a choice as a human in that moment to say, I can bulldoze my way through this, and I can be an asshole, and I can show the film, and I can receive accolades and pats on the back, or I can honor this man that I have been filming for the past 4 or 5 years of my life, you know, and we pulled it out. So now the film is finished, and we're not sure what's going to happen with it, but we're just hoping that there's a life for it, because I'm really proud of it. It's very handmade. I went over there.
Understatement.
I went over there, you know, I did have some friends that went over there and the occasional help, but basically everything was shot, you know, by myself. Sound was by myself, all of that stuff, which I wouldn't want to do it that way again.
Right,
but,
right.
But it was, you know, just for security reasons, it's the way things worked out.
I mean, you couldn't make that film today.
I don't know. It's a good question.
We were supposed to go, Chris and I were invited to go over on a production this summer, and some friends of ours these two couples were going to go over with their families for this other doc we're working on, and they're like, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know,
most of the places are probably, I mean, safe is relative to each place, right?
Right.
But like, you're not going to go into the Gaza Strip and stuff at this point. There's some just hot zones that you'd probably want to stay away from, but it's important to see.
Okay, you're saying that in context to somebody who, yeah, your hot zone and my hot zone at this stage of life are probably a little different.
But it's been, you know, I think I probably need to see a counselor over some of this, because it's been, you know, you pour yourself into a project like this, and then, you know, what happens with Ethan and Lydia and our whole family, and you kind of hope that this might be like the one redeeming factor out of all of it, and then that has to be put on ice. It's just it's a grieving process for sure. So,
you know, we're talking about this Netflix show earlier, and filmmakers in Milwaukee or whatever that would go, oh gosh, he's living the dream. That's what I've always wanted to do, is to be a filmmaker and do that. They wouldn't have context to the person that you meet in Austin that's a filmmaker says, what are you shooting? And it's like, wow, they have no idea that the pain of doing an independent impact documentary film will cost you.
Yeah.
I mean, you really have to want something else.
Unexpected circumstances that come up, you know.
It's risky.
And so, yeah, there's all the time. It's like, I think some of the best marriage advice I ever got was you have to sort of learn to love the person that you fell in love with over and over again, because you both evolve and change as people, you know. And so there's all these, you know, circumstances that pop up in your life that you don't know are going to happen, and it changes everything. So like the way that I treat my family and love my family and want to be close to them changes everything for me, you know. And you know, a lot of that is because of what happened with Ethan as well. And so it's, yes, I still travel overseas, and yes, I do travel probably way too much still. We're working on that. But it also is sort of the greater causes now. The greater cause is my family. You know what I mean? Not that it wasn't back then, but that's something that I'm pouring myself into more, and trying to be a really good dad and a really good husband. But there's also through this, so there's broken systems everywhere that, you know, filmmakers like you and me can kind of get into. Yeah. I mean, one idea that I have right now is to create a film about the health insurance system in America, you know, and that's as a direct result of, you know, Ethan flew on a helicopter, an emergency helicopter from Austin to Houston, and we got a $45,000 bill for it. It's like, this should not be happening in the richest nation on the planet.
But you also have insurance.
We had insurance. That's the thing. So like, what is it doing then? If we have insurance, then why, you know, you're supposed to help with this. And so I want to create a film that's maybe telling the story of other families who have had kids who have gotten on helicopters specifically and got unexpected bills, and just sort of a deep dive into why that's happening. So that's
Well,
one idea I have right now.
well, it's interesting you bring that up because the ambulances are no different.
Yeah.
It's smaller price tag. I think it's 3,000 to 4,000.
Yeah, but still, it's like, it's
And
crazy, right?
you'll hear people. I've heard somebody say that recently. They said, "No, don't call the ambulance. Like I will have a compound fracture. I'll get in the backseat of the car because
Exactly.
I don't want." And even if at some point they do pay for it, you still have to deal with getting to that. I mean, the hours and hours and hours I assume you've probably put into dealing with that.
Yeah, I feel like the mountains of paperwork that Lydia and I deal with because of medical issues in our family is like, it's like almost a full-time job.
Wow.
So
that's a film you'd like to make?
I think so. Yeah. It's just an idea at this point. I have ideas all the time.
Yeah,
and
you
that's
do.
one of the ideas that I want to, but right now I'm kind of just trying to be patient about the film that I created from the ground up, is what it's called, to see what happens with that, and there's a lot of people out there pulling for it to kind of come to light and see the surface. So I believe it will someday. But I'm also working with a production company in town, which has been a kind of a recent development. So I'm part-time with them right now, and I'm helping them to start a new chapter with commercial clients, kind of a human, more cinematic take on commercial clients. That's been a lot of fun for me because it's stretching a different muscle. So I'm like building budgets and proposals and pitch decks and talking with potential clients all the time. And it's actually a lot of fun. There's something about it that is just like offering me a little bit of hope right now. It's
That's
like,
awesome.
and then obviously, last year I got to work on a National Geographic documentary called Science Fair, which came out this past December. That was a ton of fun. It's a 3-part series.
Oh, is that the guys out in New York?
They're in LA. The production company is based in LA. It's called Muck Media.
Okay.
And they're incredible.
Are they?
So yeah, they are. They're amazing. And so it was so fun to be part of that. These kids that we were filming are high school age kids who are developing science projects that are being patented. They're combating, climate change. They're doing stuff with AI. It's not just your volcanoes that people used to make.
Throw the Alka-Seltzer in.
Right. And so that was a fun story to work on.
There was somebody in the last year, and I don't know where I became a reference in there, but they wrote back, and then the guy called me, and he's like, "Is everything you said about this guy true?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I couldn't put enough on paper." I was like, "You're crazy if you don't hire this guy." And they're like, "Are you serious?" I was like, "Trust me on this." I don't remember who it was.
Really?
It was,
That's hilarious.
Somebody had seen my credit or something, and they had known about you, and so they were wanting to hire you, but they were like, it was something high stakes, and they were just like, "We saw your name, you've worked with this guy," and I was like, wrote him back, and I was like, way too much to talk about. Here's the overview. And the guy called me and was like, "Is this all, like, we don't work with many people like this." I was like, "Yeah, you're not paying." I said, "Whatever you're paying him, double it."
Well, thank you.
It was like super funny. Like, we were talking on the phone, and he was asking me how we knew each other in the environments we knew each other. Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Oh no, you can be in the thick of it with him." And like, he's the calm, still waters that you need when chaos ensues. And we both know it will.
Well,
and we were laughing about it, but
thank you. I take pride in that because it's, filmmaking, and especially TV is a high stakes environment. It's high pressure, it's high stress. And I think, having somebody that can be kind of more even keeled is really important. And I've had people say that to me even on Full Swing, like, "Oh, we're glad you're here. We can sort of take a deep breath." But maybe like inside it doesn't feel that way for me, but
glad you can.
Yeah, I know. I feel horrible on the inside. No, but we'll see where the future goes. I love film. I don't have any other marketable attributes. So it's like I'm stuck in film, whether I love it or hate it for the rest of my life, probably. But I do love it. And I hope that I have the opportunity to, what I really love is digging deep on one particular project, and I hope I have that opportunity again. But right now I'm also enjoying these other little projects that are popping up here and there. And it's always uncertain, as you know. Like it's hard to Thankfully, the phone rings still, you know?
Well, yeah, but the only problem with calling you is that I think we're 3 films in,
I know.
and
I
I'm
feel
like,
horrible.
hey, let's work on this together. And you're like, I'm booked.
I
So
know.
I'm thinking maybe 2030, I'm going to plan something and then just say, lock the date.
Let's do it.
That's it.
Because I would love to work with you guys again, obviously. So
It's been too long.
yeah.
Thanks for doing this podcast.
Of course. It's
Yeah.
been fun. I feel I'm not used to talking about myself a lot. I like to be the one asking the questions. So
I know. That's the fun part. That's been the fun part about this part. So until next time.
absolutely.